Hi, Jeff Bridgman here of Jeff R. Bridgman American Antiques in York County, Pennsylvania. I've come here tonight to talk to you a little bit about the display of American flags that we frame. So I had a client with a home out west contact me saying that he wanted a flag to display in his home vertically. And he had been somewhere and seen one, I guess, and he was told, as sort of part of the sales pitch, if you will, that this was a really rare flag because it was a vertical. No, the flag by modern flag ethics, as spelled out in the Flag Code of 1923, should be displayed with the canton in the upper left, whether the flag is displayed vertically or horizontally. So what that involves is this. If you have a flag, take a look at this 38 star example. This is 38 stars, Colorado statehood. Colorado joined the Union in 1876. And here we are in the typical horizontal fashion. And you want to display it vertically, all you have to do is turn it like this. Oops, nope. The canton is not in the upper left. So in order to display this vertically, we need to actually take the whole thing off the mount and remount it completely on the other side. So, but that is possible. And typically particularly with a sewn flag, but there are more difficult issues to deal with in printed flags and some homemade flags. And I just thought I'd talk to you a little bit about that. So there are basically two kinds of flags. There are sewn flags that are pieced and sewn together in a traditional fashion, like you might expect, with stars sewn individually onto the flag and stripes cut and pieced and sewn together. And then there are printed flags, which are called parade flags or hand wavers. And those can be printed on cotton or silk or sometimes on wool. Now, in the 19th century, we generally did these by block printing. And when that happened, one side was always better than the other. The side that was printed on would be darker than the other side, even though the color bled through. So the color would bleed through, so you have a two-sided flag, but always better on one side. And the degree to which that was good or bad, depending on what side you're looking at, had to do with the printing itself, how saturated the block was, what the fabric was like, and how it transferred to the other side. So look at this little 13-star parade flag with a Star of David type pattern, and up on the reverse, look, the color did not come through well. So this flag is a good one for a horizontal display, but not good for a vertical display. It'd have to be taken off its staff, obviously. And this is what's necessary to deal with in a vertical versus horizontal display of a parade flag. Now, in the 19th century, there was no backwards or forwards. So the same sort of things that we think of today in terms of a proper display of the American flag, that stuff didn't exist in the 19th century. In fact, the flag being forwards or backwards didn't really even come into the American consciousness until, well, started to sort of happen in the late 19th century. And the Flag Code was much later, 1923. So, and it makes sense because if you say with a parade flag, if you're waving it at a parade, who cares what side is better, right? There isn't a front or a back. If you were carrying a flag into battle, did it matter? Did they say, wait a minute, no, go around the other side so the flag is right when you're, when somebody is looking at it as you're, no. That wasn't a thing until much later. So in the 19th century, anything went. And with printed flags, about half of them are printed on what we would think of as the reverse, with the color bleeding through to the obverse or front, and about half of them are printed on the front with the color bleeding through to the reverse, and the reverse side is called the bleed. So let me show you a couple of different examples here. Here is a 38 star parade flag with a triple wreath medallion configuration, 3 wreaths of stars around a center star. And look at the printing on the obverse, very nice. But if we turn it over to do a vertical amount, I'm holding this sort of at a slant to the camera so you can really get the a feel for what the other side looks like. And look how splotchy the printing is. There's some soiling that isn't even really that apparent on this side, especially when you get it against a dark ground or a solid ground of some sort. And this flag is not one that's possible to do a vertical mount on, but it's great as a horizontal. And as I said, they're about 50-50. Certainly not rare to find one that is better vertically. Parade flags were often printed on fabric in multiples per width of the fabric, like this. So here, this is a type of 38 star parade flag, a really rare variety and just exceptional to find on the original bolt. This is just a wonderful find. Look here, in the center you will see there are 6 little stars in sort of a cluster with big stars all around, so that's sort of a lineal pattern into which this little cluster has been inserted. And they're printed vertically on the bolt of fabric, and the cantons are together. So here's a great illustration of how half are horizontals, quote unquote, and half are verticals because of the way they're printed, and they're just not as nice on the other side. So they really only work best one way. And in some instances, you will find parade flags where every flag on the bolt will be really on the reverse. So here's one. Great examples, but a 20, 30, 40-foot piece of fabric. And all of these guys, once again, I'll hold it at an angle so you can see how splotchy this is. This is the bleed side. So these are not good for a horizontal display, but they do happen to be good for a vertical display in terms of how they were printed. Let's see here. But some flags make a better vertical than others. It just depends on how the star pattern presents on one side versus the other, and how the graphics present. So parade, whether it's a parade flag or a sewn flag, that can be true. Now, there are certain types of parade flags where you just can't display the other side, and it has really not a whole lot to do with the with it being the bleed or not. Let me show you an example here. Where I'm supposed to find one. Here we go. So the 38th state, Colorado, came in the year of the celebration of the 100th anniversary of American independence, the nation's centennial. And in that year, there was a huge World's Fair held in 1876 to glorify the event. It was a 6-month-long event, the World's Fair, the Centennial International Exhibition, held in Philadelphia, and 225 buildings, at least, were built just for the event. Almost like think about it like building an Olympic village. Huge. The largest of these buildings was actually the largest in the world at the time, with 21 acres on the interior. And all of this had to be decorated with patriotic things. So here is a flag made specifically for the Centennial with 38 stars. In this case, gold stars. This is one of the very few parade flags that can't even think of one off the top of my head. I think maybe there is another variety, but where they're intentionally printed in sort of a mustard yellow gold. And Centennial 1876 is printed in the same blue as the Canton. Well, all of these that I know to exist are as this one with in a reverse orientation. So the flag is backwards facing by modern flag ethics, and you can't display it on this side because then the text is in reverse. So that's one example. Now, there were also flags made for political campaigning, and in 1876, Rutherford B. Hayes won the White House, running against Samuel Tilden of New York, and Hayes was from Ohio. And here we have a wonderful overprinted flag, extraordinarily rare. Been after this for years and years. A good friend of mine owned it, and a matching Tilden. Here, the text is printed in black pigment, a block printed once they actually printed the flag, and you obviously can't show it on the reverse because, once again, the lettering would be backwards, so we only have one way to go here, which is like this. The Tilden example, which has a different star configuration, happens to be printed in the other direction, so it's backwards facing. Now, the collectors of political campaign flags don't care. They understand this about early flags, and so to them it's meaningless. To me as well, because in the 19th century, that's the way it was. It's perfectly acceptable. It's not being disrespectful to the flag. There's no intention of that at all. It's just that nobody had really sat down and thought about there ever being such a thing that one had to do. Oh, let me pull this one out. This is in pretty good shape. So here is a 38 star example made for the 1888 presidential campaign of Benjamin Harrison and Levi Morton. Now, the Harrison and Morton is printed in the same colors as stripes along the bottom and a little banner, and it just so happens that it's printed on this side with the Canton in the upper left. So it's in its proper fashion by modern flag ethics. But you can see this type of flag with the Canton on the other side just as easily. And in that case, you have to have a flag in a vertical display with a Canton on the wrong side by modern flag ethics. And once again, political flag collectors don't care. They understand that this is just the way it was. Sometimes it's actually, I don't know if I want to say it's more interesting, but it certainly gives you a different visual impact and a different visual presentation to see the flag in the other fashion. And people like things about 19th century flags that are different than what the modern flag is. It's all these eccentricities of the stars and the different proportions, colors. None of that was made official until there was no official way to do it until 1912. So until then, all the aspects of the flag were left up to the liberties of the maker. Now, let's go to sewn flags for a minute. Sewn flags are not quite as variable because they are typically the same on the reverse as they are on the obverse. Not always, but in many instances they are. Stars are typically double applique, meaning that they're applied to both sides of the flag. And whether they're machine sewn or hand sewn or whatever the case may be, they usually are roughly the same on one side as the other. Of course, you have human error and all sorts of eccentricities, but most of the time, this is true. I'm not going to open this all the way up, but here's another 38 star flag. Colorado statehood again, same 1876 to 1889. And look at this wild layout here with just 3 stars in the top row. Very, very unusual. And these are beautifully hand-sewn stars, sewn to both sides of the flag, so that if we want to display this in a vertical fashion, all we have to do is turn it over and drape it vertically. And it's basically the same thing, except, wow, are the graphics different, right? Is this cool looking? Well, maybe. I didn't think so initially, but it's kind of growing on me because it's so different from what you typically see. And this is really a notched pattern, leaving 4 open spaces for 4 different states yet to be added. 4 Western territories that had not yet become states are accommodated for here, because then all you had to do was sew another star onto the flag in one of the blank spaces, and you could add up to 4 on this without having to start all over again, basically. So now there are some flags where the stars are applied differently, and this is one of them. Here, the stars are single applique, which means that they're applied to one side, and there's a cutout made on the reverse, and the fabric underhemmed so that one star can be seen on both sides of the flag. Here I'll show you the front, and sometimes these collectors call these peekaboo stars, a name that I absolutely loathe, but it is descriptive, I guess, for, I don't know why you call them that. Seems like a very childish term for a very important thing, but, and it just annoys me, but there you have it. So here you can see the fabric underhemmed, which was really difficult to do with wool bunting like this, without it fraying all over the place. Very gauzy fabric, and it shows wonderfully, I think, on the side that some people think of as the back. It's not really the back. It's not what the maker really thought was the back, but here's what it looks like on this side. And if we're going to turn it into a vertical mount, look how different it appears, because the stars are not only smaller, but they have very different texture than they would on the other side. This isn't the best example of that, and it's really sort of hard to see in the video. Forgive the flag touching the ground here. I hate to say that with as many flags as we have. It does happen here. We do our best, but you know, kind of difficult sometimes. We try to make it up in doing the absolute best we can, right? With the preservation of flags, we take an extraordinary amount of care in that. And here's a really beautiful one with single applique stars that I want to show you. Now look here. This is what some people consider the back. No, there's not a back or a front. But look at the beautiful hand stitching on these wonderful stars and a 13-star flag of the Civil War period with an oval configuration. I think I'm going to take this guy right out so that we can take a look at the flag that's behind it, and maybe a couple of others. So when I sell someone a flag, a lot of times it might already be mounted or framed. But when I do that for myself to sell a flag, I completely realize that I may not have done what any particular client of mine might need for their home or their office or anywhere else. It may not flow with their design. They may want a different frame. They may want a different background. And they may want a vertical mount. So we will change whatever someone wishes, basically, to do for free, to do any of that, because I realize that whatever I may choose may not be what you need. So that is even true with something like this or something even more complicated, where it might take a week of solid work to take the entire flag off, reback it, and remount it. So with a sewn flag, we will typically take it and lay it out on its face with the part facing down that is going to be exposed in the frame, and we'll stitch a supportive fabric to it throughout, very carefully and expertly done in such a way that it will support the entire flag from top to bottom and keep it from sagging on its own weight when it's stitched down again to its background. It sounds like kind of a simple enough process, but it's very difficult to do in such a way that it gets the flag to be square on the final mount. This one's kind of slouching a little bit here, but it is even more work on a flag like this that has fringe, because in addition to stitching to flatlining the flag, underlaying it with a supportive fabric, and then stitching it all down, we also have to stitch down all of the fringe, because if we don't, the fringe will fall over in the frame. No matter, you can put the plexiglass against it, but plexiglass is flexible, and over time it will droop down either forwards or sideways, and it will be unsightly. It will fade inconsistently. If it fades at all, wool typically doesn't, but it could be very detrimental to the flag. Bolslaw Mastai, the first big collector to do a book, put many of his flags in a plexiglass mount so you could see them on both sides. Almost all of them slipped in the mount, and over time it destroyed most of them. He had an 1876 Centennial flag like the one I showed you with the blue printing, and I owned it at one point. I had to buy it. It was the one in his book, but oh God, did he just destroy it by doing that. Super unfortunate. It's iconic because it's very well displayed in his book, which is sort of the Bible of flag collecting, or one of them. But oh, And there were other wonderful Centennial flags that happened to. There's one with an image of George Washington on it that got damaged. Luckily, not nearly so much. And what a mess. So I want to wind up by just showing you a couple of other flags from the Centennial that are interesting ones and sort of add to what we're talking about here. Now, as I said, there are silk parade flags and there are wool parade flags. This is a printed silk flag. So here it is in the horizontal position. And this just so happens to be one that's nearly identical on the reverse. Printed in such a way that the colors are intense on both sides. So this is one of those rare instances when we can actually flip the flag over and there's no change on a printed flag, basically. This, I believe, was made by Cheney Silk, the nation's largest silk producer. It's not signed. Parade flags are almost never signed. There's a couple that are known, but it is an extraordinarily rare thing. But I recognize the work, the type of stars, the colors, the fabric itself. Let's see. And then I'll show you a printed wool flag. So cotton absorbs water. Silk is, and then it gets heavy and it rots and it gets tears, right? Really a horrible thing. And a lot of times the colors on a parade flag that's cotton or silk, they won't be color fast in a way that they can get wet. So when they were preparing for the Centennial Exposition, they started to make some press-dyed or clamp-dyed wool flags. These are just dyed in a resist fashion. And I won't get into all the details of that. But wool sheds water, so they wanted to print flags on wool so that they would last longer, so they could display them at the Centennial, even outdoors, and have them keep their color and their form. So here is a printed wool flag with a triple wreath medallion and big stars in just the corners, which is really beautiful. And it is almost the same on the reverse, a little bit cruder on the reverse, but not much. Not in a way that really affects its displayability or appearance. So this is a gorgeous flag made by Horstman, a Philadelphia maker, and once again, not signed, but I'm familiar with the design, and I've seen examples that have sleeves that are signed. I know it's a Horstman flag. Really great to have a Philadelphia flag made for the Philadelphia International Exhibition, the Centennial International Exhibition, our first World's Fair. Sewn flags, typically 8 feet long or larger. A battle flag, infantry battle flag, was even bigger than this. 6 by 6.5 feet, huge, square, so that it wouldn't drag on the ground. So you could carry as big a flag as possible, but on the diagonal, it was shorter as a square flag. And, so most sewn flags are just too big to display indoors. And as you lose a foot, they get rarer and rarer and rarer. Hardly any sewn flags were 4 feet long, like the example I showed you in the very beginning that I tried to rotate and it didn't work, right? Well, here is another one with another notched pattern, a different style, and just a tiny size. And this is a gorgeous flag. Just, you really can't get the full perception of how nice it is in a video, I don't think, but it's entirely hand-sewn stars and all sorts of different patterns. And of course, you can't do this, right? But so here we have to take the whole thing off the mount it again. But That's okay. And we also will mount it differently so that it's squarer when we do it in a vertical. And that takes a lot of skill and attention to do so that the flag will look the best it possibly can. We have been doing this for about 23 years, a little bit over 23 years, and have done thousands of flags. So luckily, we have a lot of experience in doing that in such a way that you will really enjoy how it looks for a very long time. So this is kind of a fragile guy here. Now, so I just kind of have to make sure it's okay to tip this over and show it to you. This is a parade flag with a really rare star pattern, and unlike many textiles which need to be perfect, are expected to be perfect by collectors, such as quilts, which were often made and given as gifts or presentation gifts of some sort, and put away and stored carefully and treasured, or samplers, which were made by little girls to show their sewing skills, usually in a private school setting, and then framed and treasured for years and years by families. It's what today you might call cross-stitch. Horrible word in the antiques world, makes us cringe, textile people. But at any rate, that's once again, like peekaboo stars, kind of an accurate description of what they are. But most textiles need to be like that. But flags, on the other hand, these were used outdoors, and there's something about a flag that shows its age that is somehow endearing and majestic all at the same time. So here is a beautiful 38 star parade flag made for the Centennial Exposition, almost certainly. Made all these great patterns and wonderful parade flags at that time, and for display for the Centennial. And if you look at this, first it appears like it is a triple wreath, but it is not. This is what's called the Great Star pattern, a star made out of stars, and it's combined with a wreath design. So one of the rare designs I haven't shown you is the Great Star, because I don't have a standalone example right here, and chose not to bring one out. But if you look here, look at the perimeter of the star is right here, 5-pointed Great Star, embedded in the circular wreath with a star in the center and 2 in the corners, with 2 blank spaces left open, like the notched pattern, for the easy addition of 2 more states. So you have to look hard to see this, but this is a super rare design and a really beautiful one. Love the losses on this. Really translates its age, and beautiful, beautiful parade flag. And this one cannot be turned over because on the reverse, look at the printing. On the bleed side, this has to be vertical, because on the bleed side, the printing is not strong. I'm going to wind up with my favorite flag of this entire group. So sometime around the year 2000, maybe a little bit afterwards, I bought with my ex-business partner the only known example of this particular type of flag. This is what I call a circle and a square, and there is a printed wool variety like this, but this is a printed cotton flag, and at the time the one we bought was the only one known. Today there's about 6 or 7, but only 2 are in this sort of condition. The original one I bought, I sold to collector Richard Pierce, and it was used, as advertising for a lecture and a large exhibition that I did at the Heart of Country Antique Show in, I think, 2005, which was the same year that Richard Pierce came out with his book, and it's featured in there, featured in the book, the other one, not this one. And I later bought it back and sold it to another private client. I was very privileged to own it twice, and it was used for advertising for Richard's book signings as well, I believe. Just one of the most gorgeous things, I think, of any sort of flag to exist. And it can be displayed horizontally. It's pretty strong on the bleed side, but as expensive as this little guy is, you probably want to display it in the best fashion that you possibly can. So thanks for joining me today as we take a look at a whole bunch of types of flags made for the Centennial Exposition, in order that I could tell you something about vertical versus horizontal display, and something about parade flags versus sewn flags, and how that all works in terms of getting you something that will work wonderfully for your space. So thanks for joining me, and I will see you again soon.